What rhymes with corner? If you have a great term that rhymes with corner that expresses sadness, write to us at funmastermikeneedshelpwithhisvideos.com. Just kidding. That's not a real email address or website, so please don't write to us. The knight. He's literally as old as the game of chess itself. That's right. Chess has always had a knight. I've done my research. Sometimes he's had elephants. Sometimes the elephants have gone away. But the knight, well, he's been there to stay. And today, we're going to supercharge the knight because I'm going to tell you how to get the most out of your horses. In fact, that horse is going to change into an octopus. Don't believe me? Well, I'm going to show you how. But don't forget to stick around till the end because I'm going to give you a fun challenge game, and we're going to see if you are better and faster than Funmaster Mike. But before we do, let's talk about how the knight can be a super knight or an octopus when a knight is right in the middle of the chessboard. That is when the knight is at the greatest powers, because the knight can go to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and you know what else has 8 legs? An octopus. That's right. Those of you out there who are studying Latin, and who's doing that before high school? Octo means 8. That's where your knight loves to be. In fact, he doesn't even have to be in the direct center of the board. Even if he's on a square like, let's pretend, F3. Let's move the knight, go ahead and move him to F3. Remember, the knight that starts on G1, he can go to F3 right away. And even if the knight's on F3, he can still move to 8 different squares. But guess what? He doesn't get all 8 legs when he's on the edge of the board. This knight, which begins on G1, if he started by moving to the square H3, he doesn't have 8 squares. He's got 1, 2, 3, 4. He's no longer an octopus. He's a quadrupus, not quite as happy. And in fact, if the knight moves to the corner of the board, pretend he's on H3, maybe he goes to F2, then he goes to the square H1. When he's on H1, he can only go to 2 different squares. He is, well, I guess he's like a human being. He's got 2 legs, okay? But we want the horse to be a little bit more powerful and jump a lot further than humans. So, with all of those basics out of the way, let's talk about some even more useful information regarding the knight. Boom! This time, I've put the knights on the 4 happy squares. 90% of the time, I want your knights going to these 4 squares. And in fact, from these 4 squares, they aim at the center of the board, which are more important squares than the ones on the edge. But the knight can also go to that square and to that square. He could even go backward if he needs to. If you think I'm crazy, well, I'm going to show you an example of that a little bit later on. Now, from the happy squares, which are these 4 squares, you could even try to go to the center. Now, don't capture this pawn right away, because this knight will capture you back. You're going to lose a knight for only a pawn. But you could play the move pawn to d4. This is called the Scotch game. And when the pawn takes, then your knight can take back, and this knight is the best knight on the chessboard. Of course, black might capture you, but then your queen is actually pretty good in the middle of the board in this particular position as well. Okay, those are the basics, but now we're going to move on and talk about some more advanced things. For example, in this position, which was reached by the 13th world champion, Mr. Garry Kasparov. He knew about getting knights to happy squares. This knight is quite happy. This knight, not very happy at all. So he first makes his knight on c3 even happier, because you see how this knight for black is pinned? Well, Kasparov played knight to d5, and that is the happiest octopus knight in the history of chess. Because first of all, he can't be captured, because remember, that knight is pinned, so he's putting pressure on the pinned piece. And by the way, if the bishop ever takes, and this queen, obviously she's not going to take back because the knight's there. But if we can ever get that queen distracted in any way, there's a possible fork on c7. That is the beauty of this knight being on this square. In fact, let's pretend black plays queen to d7. To get out of this pin, well, there's actually a couple of good moves for white. First of all, you could play knight to b6. That's the beauty of the octopus. My octopus teacher is teaching us that the knight is forking the queen and the rook. Or you could bring the knight back. Instead, you could play bishop takes knight. And when the pawn takes, then the octopus jumps to f6, and we fork the king and the queen. Okay, so we can already see how strong Kasparov's knight is. Well, what did black do? Black played bishop to e7 to break the pin. Oh no! Now this knight for the black team can capture our strong knight. So what does Kasparov do? He values his knight so much that he captures the other knight, keeping his knight on the board, even though that means losing the bishop pair. Because after bishop takes, he has the best minor piece on the chessboard. Now, he does recognize that his other knight is quite sad. So what does he do? He reroutes this knight on a3 on the edge of the board, where he can't go very many places at all, to back up the strong knight, because he knows that one day Black will try to get rid of this knight on d5. Black could use the bishop. Black could bring this knight backward, but Black is going to try to remove that super strong knight. So Kasparov plays c3. Now this knight can go to the c2 square and then back up the first knight by going to e3. That is some super smart knight movement chess. Now Black plays bishop to b7. Here comes the knight to c2. And Black plays knight to b8. Oh no, bringing a knight back to the edge of the board. We've already talked about how that's not where knights usually belong, okay? Now, I would have played knight to e3 in this position. In fact, the computer likes that move even more, okay? But Kasparov had something really tricky up his sleeve. He played the move pawn to a4. Now, it is true, the bishop could take the knight. Kasparov would probably take back with the queen, and then eventually he would bring the second knight around to replace the first knight. That would have been his plan. So instead, Black takes. Kasparov takes back with the rook. Here comes the knight to d7. Now the knight had just gone backward, where he's not very happy. Now he moved out to d7. Can you figure out where that knight is going next? It definitely appears he's coming to b6. He's going to make a trade for our really strong knight. So Kasparov sees that and he stops it. He plays rook to b4, stopping this knight from moving to b6, because if it does, Kasparov will have 2 different attackers, and only the queen will be defending. 2 against 1. Advantage, Kasparov. So, knight to b6, not possible. Instead, this knight had to go to the backup square, which is c5. And in this position, Kasparov says, you know what? This bishop is one day going to take my knight, or something even worse might happen. This knight might take the pawn one day and remove the defender of the knight. We might lose that knight completely. So Kasparov made a shocking decision in this position. He gave away the rook for the bishop, all to make sure that this knight could stay on the d5 square forever. This is one of the most famous exchange sacrifices of all time. And look at this poor black knight. The knight took back. The knight is not very happy on b7. He's not in the center. He's not on a happy square. And Kasparov went on to win the game, because not only did he have one strong knight, he had a second strong knight. And just to show you how great of a player he was, I want to show you one more move. He played pawn to b4, which keeps this knight out of the game completely. The knight can't capture his own queen, not that you'd want to. Can't capture your own pawn, not that you'd want to. And now he can't even go to the square c5 or a5, because Kasparov stopped it by playing pawn to b4. So we have a great example of one of the best knights in the history of chess and one of the worst knights in the history of chess. Okay, now those are all the basics, but guess what, chess kids? Chess is more about learning general rules, because a large part of your life is going to be learning the exceptions to the rules, and that is where the game gets really fun. When you get to go against Fun Master Mike's advice, because you've got a good reason. And in chess, when you get to a little bit more of an advanced level, you're going to be able to do this with more and more confidence. Let's move on to some of those exceptions. Bam! Here is the first one. And guess what? 2 very famous players competed in this game. Black was Fabiano Caruana, and white was Magnus Carlsen, basically 2 of the biggest names in the history of chess. Now in this position, this knight looks pretty happy, doesn't he? He's aiming at the center, not that he can take the pawn safely, but he is pressuring the pawn. Maybe he'll go to d5 one day. But Fabiano, who knows way more about chess than I ever will, played knight to h5. Why is he bringing the octopus knight to the edge of the board? Well, this is one of the exceptions. First of all, this knight might hop in to the f4 square. But more importantly, this knight might capture the bishop, and then Fabiano would acquire the 2 bishops, the killer bees, and the bishops would be very, very strong. So it's not like this knight is going to hang out on the edge of the board for very long. That knight is just going to make a little pit stop on the way from the edge of the board back to the center, either that strong square f4 or capturing the bishop. Now, for those of you who are throwing tomatoes at your screen saying, but Fun Master Mike, that knight is not defended, and I'm a super advanced chess kid, and you taught me to look for tactics on pieces that are not defended, because loose pieces drop off. First of all, congratulations, thank you, awesome, and thank you. You did everything right. However, Fabiano, who, remember, one of the best chess players of all time, he saw a little bit more in this position. For example, in this position, let's pretend that white plays knight takes pawn, a sacrifice of the knight trying to get the knight back. What? Well, the problem is, after knight takes knight, and then Magnus Carlsen would capture the knight back, it almost looks like black has won a pawn. Then Fabiano would have played bishop to g4. Uh-oh, where's this queen going to go? Yeah, I'm kind of running out of squares for the queen. I guess she could go to h4, but then we trap her for good with pawn to g5. So Fabiano saw even more into the position and knew that nothing bad would happen to his knight. Okay, if you followed all of that, congratulations. Maybe you too will be 2,800 rated one day. Okay, let's go on to our next exception. Bam! Here we go. In fact, Funmaster Mike has been in this position many times in his life. Another time where you might move a knight to the edge of the chessboard is to free the f-pawn. Now in this position, I do give myself permission to move my own f-pawn because if I do, there is a 0.0% chance that anything bad will happen to my king on this open diagonal because it is covered by white pawns. So in this position, I usually play knight to h5, and this actually does more than free the f-pawn. The main idea is to play f7 to f5 and go after white's center. Another reason is because the queen sometimes wants to jump to the square h4. So we're opening up that diagonal. And by the way, the knight serves a very important function in this position. Let's just give white a not terribly good move. Let's say that white develops the bishop. In this position, you can totally consider playing this move queen check. Because if the pawn comes to g3, in many variations, the knight can actually capture this pawn. Because if the pawn takes back, ooh, Mr. Rook is hanging out. In fact, he's hanging, he's not even hanging out. He's going to be lost. Now, I do want to give you a little bit of caution. If the knight takes, you do have to have a good answer to bishop to f2. And there may not be a good answer in this position, but I'm simply showing you an idea. And if we back up, the third reason the knight comes here is because sometimes it jumps right back into the middle of the game. In fact, if white plays the move g4, I'm going to play knight f4, and that is a super duper outpost. Yes, white could take, but then when I take back, I have control of the dark squares for the rest of the game, and then my bishop is super open. So I would actually play knight to h5 for a multitude of reasons. That's right. That knight contains multitudes, for those of you who are fans of poetry. Okay, so let's move on to our next exception to the rule. Bam! Well, if you're thinking, I'm Mr. Mike, this looks really familiar. And if you think that that's the case, you win the Superstar ChessKid YouTube Viewer Award. Because in fact, we did cover this exact position in a very recent video. And I told you, when facing the 4 pawns of tack, do not be afraid. You can play the Funmaster Mike special, knight to a6. Why is the knight coming to this side of the board? Well, first of all, if he'd come to the happy square, black could play pawn to d5 and make your knight run away right away. When the knight's on a6, he cannot be attacked right away, and he's not going to stay there for long. He's going to jump in to c5 or to b4. Now, if you want to know all about where the knight ends up being in different variations, I encourage you to go back and watch that video. Don't do it now, because remember, we've still got our fun game coming up at the end of this video. But just to show you one line, just to jog your memory, because I'm sure it's been filled with chess since you watched that last video, pretend that white plays bishop to e2. Now we play pawn to e5. We're trying to get this pawn to move, because the minute that pawn moves, our knight acquires a super awesome square. And just imagine if our knight got to c5. He'd be teaming up perfectly. With this knight on the f6 square, we'd have double octopus aiming at the e4 square. So white likes to keep a pawn on d4 in this position. But what if white plays pawn on f takes, and then we take? But what if it doesn't move? What if white plays knight takes pawn, keeping the pawn on this square to keep this square covered up? Well, now I would play pawn to c5. And if white plays bishop to e3, trying to keep a pawn there forever, I showed you this line in the previous video. We're going to play knight to b4. The knight goes from 0 to hero. When the knight goes to b4, he's about to be a superstar, because if white plays the no parking sign, we're going to play this cool trick. We're going to leave our knight on b4. We're going to play pawn takes pawn, forking the knight and the bishop. And if white wants to keep the bishop and plays bishop takes pawn, we're going to play the fantastic, the amazing queen takes d4, sacrificing the queen. And after queen takes, here comes the octopus, knight to c2. It is a royal fork of the king and the queen and the rook. And as I always remind you, it's neat for there to be a royal fork, but you're never actually capturing the rook. You're always taking the queen. And when the king moves, we take, and after knight takes queen. You can see here that black has 4 minor pieces, white only has 3, so black is going to win this game. Let's move on to our final exception. And this one comes to you at the hands and the brain of our current world champion, Grandmaster Gukesh. And he actually played this in the World Championship. Now look at his poor knight down here. Hasn't moved all game and can't go to the happy square. But that is not a problem for a teenage world champion because he knows new and creative ways to get that knight in the game. And he plays knight to a3. The knight is going to the side. And in fact, I didn't even teach you what most chess teachers say. We say knight on the rim is dim, but remember, not at the hands of a young world champion. That knight has big plans in life. And you're probably thinking, I know, the knight's going to go to b5, and from b5, it's going to jump to a square like c7. And you know what, chess kids? That's a great thought. But after black plays the move rook to d7, instead of going to b5, he had a different idea. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of an advanced idea alert. Yep, usually comes once a video. If this queen ever captures the pawn, Gukesh wants to keep the b file completely open so he can play rook to b1 and go after the queen and get the rook on the half-open file with tempo. So he actually doesn't play knight to b5. He plays knight to c2. What is this, crazy knight? Why is he going backward? Well, let's just play a few more moves. The queen does take. He does play rook to b1. The queen does have to move. He advances the rook up the chessboard. Black finally gets the king castled. But now comes the question of what to do with the knight. The knight is pressuring this pawn, totally true. But if it goes back to a3, it's just kind of going back and forth. He plays knight to a1. That's right. He puts his knight in the corner of the board. You might only do this once or twice in your whole chess career, but here it is happening at the World Championship. Now, is he going to stay in the corner for very long? No, he's not. Now, I do need some help, chess kids. When the knight's on the edge, remember I told you that chess teachers say knight on the rim is dim? Well, we need a really, really sad word for a knight in the corner. What rhymes with corner? If you have a great term that rhymes with corner that expresses sadness, write to us at funmastermikeneedshelpwithhisvideos.com. Just kidding. That's not a real email address or website, so please don't write to us, but maybe you could just think of a funny one. And if I ever see you in person, you can tell me, okay? But again, the knight's not staying there for that long. He is making a pit stop. When the rook moves to b8, then Gukesh brings his knight to b3. And now look at the super strong knight. Still pressuring the center and pressuring this pawn also. And perhaps the biggest goal is to get that knight to the c5 square, where it's going to attack the rook and pressure this pawn. And of course, he's going to double up his rooks, and everything is going to be aiming at the black queen side. In fact, after e6, the knight did jump to c5. When the rook moved to e7, he did double his rooks. Look at how perfectly all 3 of these pieces are aiming at the pawn. And if you're thinking, well, Funmaster Mike, the queen and the bishop are also kind of aiming at the pawn too. You're totally right, chess kids. I have never seen a position with such fantastic piece coordination. Okay, and in fact, he won the game in one more move. Just in case you want to see, after queen to c8, he played the really cool move, queen takes c6. And the knight is just kind of awesome hanging out there. And the point is that after pawn takes queen, rook takes rook would win the queen back. But this knight found a very creative journey to a super awesome square, and it was pretty cool that it helped him win the World Championship. Okay, now before we get to our game, I haven't forgotten about you. You've seen that knights are usually happy either on the happy squares or in the center, but there are exceptions to every rule, and now you've seen a couple of them. All right, here's our game, chess kids. Boom! Now, I want you to set this up on a regular chessboard, okay? I want to see how fast you are. Set a little timer, okay? Borrow mom or dad's iPhone, okay? Get the stopwatch out. And here are the rules to this game. Your knight's going to start in the corner of the chessboard, and I want your knight to touch every square in succession all the way around the chessboard. You have to move the knight with legal knight moves, okay? Please don't pick up the knight on A1 and move into B1. That's not how a knight moves, okay? However, these 4 pawns are providing a bit of a nuisance. You are not allowed to capture any of black's pawns, and, this is the hard part, you're not allowed to move your knight to a square that those pawns could capture you.
What?
So the black pawns are moving down the board, which means that you can't move your knight to B2 or D2 or E2 or G2 or E5 or G5 or B5 or D5. You can't capture the black pawns, and you can't put your knight on a square where he is being attacked. Okay, so for example, the knight's on A1. A1 already counts. You've got to figure out a path to get to B1. For example, you could play knight to C2. That's a safe square. Then you could play knight to A3. That is on the side of the board. But then you move the knight back to the square B1. Now, getting to C1 is going to be even harder. Remember, you can't capture, and you can't move to D2. That's a square that the black pawn is aiming at. So you've got to find a fast way to get to C1. For example, knight to A3. Knight to C2, knight to B4, that works. Remember, the black pawns are going down the board. The black pawn cannot capture you. Then you could play knight to D3 or knight to A2, either one, then knight to C1. You want to time yourself and see what amount of time you're able to complete this puzzle. You got to start on A1. You have to touch all of these squares. You have to touch all of these squares, and you have to wind up back on A1. I don't care about the number of knight moves. I want you to time yourself using a stopwatch. Fun Master Mike is able to do it in about 2 minutes, which is pretty fast. If you're able to beat 2 minutes, give yourself a pat on the back, and you'll know that you're faster than Fun Master Mike.